So do you want to keep a beautiful discus tank like the one behind me? Well, I'm going to teach you how. Discus are seen as one of the hardest fish to keep in the industry. However, they don't have to be. I found easy ways to keep all these fish beautiful, happy, and healthy, as you can see, and I'm enjoying them so much more. So some of the topics I'm going to cover are tank mates for your discus, where to buy your discus, how to set up the proper aquarium, what food to feed your fish, also covering some big topics that are considered the hard part of keeping discus. However, all these things can be quite simple with just a few steps, so stay tuned. Here's my 90-gallon discus tank. You might say, oh, it looks great, it might look bad. Whatever you feel, that's fine. Remember, this hobby is for you and your enjoyment. The more you enjoy keeping your fish, the better your fish will be off. I truly believe that. If you're not having fun or your fish are stressing you out in keeping them, then those fish will end up doing poorly because you're no longer in love with the tank and it's more of a headache for you. To get started for tank mates for discus, so some of the tank mates I have are cardinal tetras. You can also keep rummy nose, some cories that do better in warmer water like stir-by cories. I don't have stir-bys in here. I have Malini cories and I think it might be a little too hot for them. I also have some clown loaches in here, and I've tried other tank mates as well. I have found with discus is that the tank mates really can make this aquarium fun or make your discus really unhappy. I've tried angelfish for a while. The angelfish get way too big and just bully the discus out, or too aggressive for them. I've tried German blue rams. Those tend to do better, but they can also be quite aggressive in pushing the discus off. What you really want in your discus tank is the discus being the main focus of the tank and the main fish or display fish for the tank, because they're gonna be the happiest. Discus are cichlids, but they're one of the wimpiest cichlids you'll ever see, and I'll explain why at the end of this video and how it can affect your tank. So for tank mates, I would just stick to tetras, bottom dwellers. If you have a large enough tank, then you can get away with doing some German blue rams, as they'll inhabit the bottom of the tank. I found that the German blue rams, if they're at the bottom and they start pairing off, that the discus won't be able to enter the bottom of the tank. Another great tank mate though is geophagus. They will keep your sand super clean. However, it is difficult to have plants with geophagus, but they'll keep the sand super clean. They're not aggressive towards the discus don't bother them, and you could probably do quite a few in a larger tank. This is a 90-gallon, and I had thought about doing a couple of redhead Taphoe geophagus because they stay quite small. The one I had was larger, and he just made it very difficult to keep the plants. One day I would love a beautiful big setup, maybe in a 125 like over here, where I could keep that mixture of fish. Plan the tank you want, get it set up, get it cycled for a bit. You don't want to just add fish, especially discus. They're not tolerant of like poor water conditions. So make sure your tank is cycled for sure. I would add tetras, the stir-bys, all those other fish you want to keep first. Let them get that tank really established, then start adding your discus, especially after quarantine. Now we're gonna discuss the aquarium setup. So there's a lot of things online depending on what size discus you have, what size aquarium. The rough rule online is like 10 gallons of water per one adult discus fish. As you can see in here, this is a 90-gallon. I have way more than 9 discus, and I'm going to be adding more that I have down there. Now for tank size, I honestly wouldn't do anything smaller than a 4-foot tank. I'd do like a minimum of a 75-gallon tank, because I kept them in this 65-gallon tank over here, but they weren't doing so well and I didn't have enough of them, and it was just kind of cramped because you can't really decorate it nicely. So, and the discus can grow quite fast. So at least a 75-gallon tank, you can keep a nice group of them in there and happily. And now for filtration, honestly, you could run discus tanks on sponge filters. As long as the filter is big enough to process the amount of waste and you're doing enough water changes, that's all that matters. So I'm not gonna tell you X amount to whatever amount. Just do enough filtration that covers the tank. You test your levels. You wanna be testing your levels, especially if you notice your fish are moody. As long as you can keep your water clean with the discus fish, I think that's the biggest important factor. When you are overstocking your tanks, you have to make sure you're on top of your water. I have automatic water change systems on all my fish tanks. So make sure that you can stay up to date with your water, doing regular water changes. I keep my aquarium at 85. I've gone higher, I've gone lower. At 85, I've not had any issues with keeping plants. Most people say that the plants won't do as well, but I keep Amazon swords, jungle val, ludwiga, and these seem to be doing pretty well. This plant over here that I just added, not so well, the crinum, but maybe it'll take off. If you're having baby discus like this one over here, quite small, it's often better to keep the water warmer because then you can feed more and get them to grow faster. And the water changes, you know, it gets off with stunting and hormones in the water, so change the water as much as you can regularly. So if you can do twice a week, that's great. If you can do only once a week, large water change, do that. Whatever is sustainable. Discus are moody fish, and I'll explain that all at the end, why they're such a hard fish to keep. Know that consistency is gonna win out overall with all your fish tanks. So if you do regular water changes, that is better for the fish than doing twice one week, once the other week. It'll just stress them out. So let's do regular water changes on whatever you can manage. That's the most important thing. As far as the scape, things like that, I've tried different tank setups with wood poking, and when I had the angelfish in there, the discus might run into poking wood, but in nature, these fish come from the Amazon. So they're with piranhas, they're with a bunch of other debris, they can barely see in the water, so just be mindful of that. Your tank setup, definitely wanna have more open space, definitely have an area where they can maybe retreat to if they feel scared. Also, lighting on your aquarium. Too bright of lights might make your discus hide a bit. Brighter lights might make them feel more exposed, and that's what having tetras and things like that help them to come out more and more. But after you keep them for a while, they're quite out and about. They love coming to the glass. They're excited for food. Now we're gonna talk about the pH situation of your discus, which leads into buying discus. I do not chase pH. I'm in Florida, we have pretty high pH. Chasing pH, I don't think is recommended. I've learned that from Aquarium Co-op. It's just not worth the hassle. If you can have something in the substrate that helps keep the pH at what you want, do that. But also buying your discus will make or break that pH thing. The discus I buy tend to come from waters that have higher pH, so they do better. And so if you can source your discus fish, now we're gonna get into buying your fish. Buy your fish with similar water parameters to yours. Because if you buy your fish doing that, your discus will be much better, because a lot of problems discus have is they're not happy with the water. They're moody little fish, they're picky, they want their perfect little water. Make sure you can find fish either born in your state, raised there from a breeder, or that they're in similar water at a hatchery or wherever they may be. That's where you want to get them in, and then they'll do well in your water. Discus love to be in groups, so if you can get 6 or more, you'll find that you'll have greater success. So when buying your discus, make sure you can get groups that are roughly similar in size, because they'll probably be eating the same. Not one fish will get bullied out over the other, but the more fish, the less aggression spread. Also, when you're buying new fish, quarantine your discus. One of the biggest mistakes I've ever made keeping discus was not quarantining them, because I didn't have the tank space. So if you can just set up a 10-gallon, quarantine, make sure they're good, because you just introduce a whole bunch of pathogens and things to other fish. When you're feeding your discus, the top male or the top alpha fish in the tank will be the most aggressive in chasing all the other fish. All right, now let's go into feeding. So my discus, I try to feed them a much varied diet as possible. So I have a bunch of food up here. I have Bio Gold, I have flakes. Oh, didn't mean to drop that. Also feed Vibra-Bites. Don't look at the name because it's the wrong name, but Vibra-Bites, Color Bits, Tetra Bits, and I just try to feed the most varied diet that I can to my discus. The reason for that is that a lot of discus get stuck on bloodworms or any other food, live foods, frozen foods, and it's very hard to get them to eat anything else. And bloodworms are not good for your discus long term. They just cause a lot of issues. They're a great snack. They're almost like candy for fish more than anything else, so occasional treats, but don't get them hooked, because I have issues where discus down here, like the one back there, they're refusing to eat, and there's a yellow one back there. It hasn't eaten in months because it only wants bloodworms. It also makes it very difficult for you if you were to ever go away and you need somebody else to take care of the fish room. They have to feed more difficult foods. All these discus in here, like these guys, love to eat pellets, flakes, anything I throw in the tank. Some are a little bit more picky. So that's why it's also very important when you source your discus that you ask the breeder or whoever you're buying it from what they're feeding their fish. If they got them on dried foods, frozen foods, and they're feeding a mixture, that's a good discus. If they're just feeding one type of food like bloodworms or just one type of pellet, you gotta be careful, especially the bloodworms. It just makes it harder, the costs go up, because you want foods that you can feed fast and readily. You're gonna be wanting to feed them roughly like 2 to 3 times a day, because the water is so much warmer and their metabolisms are gonna be much higher than anything else. If you keep the temperature at 82, maybe once to twice a day you can get away with, especially as they get bigger. But smaller discus, you're gonna be wanting to feed 3 times a day if you can, to really grow them fast and doing well. And you wanna make sure all the fish are able to get food and that not one fish is getting singled out over the others. Just be mindful that because the water is gonna be warmer, they're gonna be hungrier more often, just like you would if you had run a lot or if you had increased your metabolism a lot. Now, if your discus is not eating and it won't take new foods, I am still struggling with this and trying new different methods. One thing you can try doing is increasing the temp to 88 or higher slowly over time, and eventually they'll start to eat. Also, when you're buying your new fish, new discus tend to be very moody for a few days before they even start to eat. Now let's talk about the hard part. The hard part of keeping discus is that they're expensive, they're moody, they're quite sensitive to different changes in their environment, and they require quite a bit of care compared to other fish. That is what would be the hardest part of keeping these fish. Discus, like I said, are very, very moody fish. I've had my lights up here be a different color and the fish were hiding. Now, if I gave them a few days, they probably get used to it, but they'll just hide, they'll color down a bit. Really frustrating because you have these beautiful fish and you don't really know why or what's bothering them. If you have water that's not matching where they came from, it can take them a while to adjust. That's why it's important to get them from the same source. You have discus that might get bullied too much in the tank, and then one is hiding, not coming out to eat, and it's not doing terrible, it's still alive, but it's not doing great and flourishing like the others. So make sure you keep your numbers up. When you have tank mates that bully them, they also get really sad and they'll just kind of mope in the corner or in the back, and then it normally leads to health problems, and then you just have struggles with that. Also, why I say the easy way is because I just stopped listening to a lot of online forums and articles that saying discus are stunted, discus have this, you got to keep them at this, you got to do 90% water changes every day. If you're keeping these fish to enjoy them and you want them to do well, fish have different genetics just like people, right? So some fish may not get as big as others. There's Asian strains of discus, German strains of discus, and then I think a couple others, and depending on those strains that come from different breeders as well, will determine the size of the discus and how big it's gonna be. So stunting, that's why you wanna do more water changes with the hormones in the water, but that fish genetically might not be able to get as big as some discus that are dinner plate size. And you just gotta enjoy these fish for what they are and not stress yourself out trying to chase parameters and things. And once I started doing that, I started enjoying my fish much more, and my fish started doing much better as a result. Now let me tell you why I love discus. They're beautiful. They look like saltwater fish. They're very peaceful. They're not aggressive and chasing each other like these African cichlids are all the time, which can be quite stressful to people. They're beautiful, beautiful fish that just really catch your eye. They don't move too fast. They have little personalities. And then you can keep some beautiful school of tetras. They're just a really calming fish to look at. They get very excited for food, and they're a unique shape, which is really fun. My sister calls them the pancake fish. They have funny little faces. Also, even though they're super moody and super sensitive, it also tells you right away if something's wrong with the aquarium, which is super helpful in fish keeping, because sometimes you'll have fish in here that one might die, and you don't really know why. There's no other signs of illness or anything else wrong with the tank. However, with discus, as soon as something is going wrong in the tank, they're in the corner, their color fades, they are unhappy, they won't come out. Immediately you can check a couple things like testing your water, the lighting, the food, the levels. If you change something in the tank, it immediately tells you. Rummy nose are also good for that. They will color up their nose or not, depending on how happy or not they are in the tank. My biggest, I'm sweating, I'm getting so amped up about these discus. Honestly, I love my discus. They keep the room really hot though, so it makes the humidity. That's another thing. When you're keeping your aquarium at a higher temp, you wanna get good enough heaters that can stay at that temp. Also, I would do a few heaters. I have 2 heaters in this tank because you don't want one heater just always going on, so it helps prevent a malfunction. Because keeping these tanks at 85, if you're in colder climate, it's much harder. Even in Florida, we're at 78, 76, and warming this tank up can be a difficult challenge. So you wanna make sure that you have covered lids that keep all the heat in. Also, with higher temps, you have to be very mindful of oxygen. I have a lot of bubbles going in this tank. The higher the temp, the faster the oxygen is removed from the water. That can be something that you just gotta make an eye out for. If there's not enough oxygen, make sure there's enough water flow or movement at the top of the tank as well. Bubbles, the bubbles help disrupt the surface to have oxygen exchange basically. So my biggest piece of advice to keeping discus and wanting to keep them in an easy, fun way is don't stress yourself out. create something consistent that you can maintain, and the fish will be way better off. Be very, very patient. Discus are moody little guys, and you'll soon find out. It might take a few days for those discus to warm up in the tank, to get really comfortable, to feel like themselves, to come out in the swimming. So be patient. And last thing, enjoy your fish. Have fun with them. Don't stress yourself out about doing different things. If you found this video helpful, make sure to subscribe and like down below. Also watch this video if you enjoyed this one, because I know you'll love it. Have a beautiful day. Thank you